Let me tell you what my deep research and basically vision is.
I hope there's Bigfoot. I don't think there is.
I'm not telling you nothing.
The aliens won't let it happen.
Happening now, breaking.
Bernie Sanders is angry.
Bears beats Battlestar Galactica.
What are the tips? Give me some tips on how to work with Wes Anderson.
Be ready to speak very fast and very clearly, because that's definitely one key thing.
I will only tell the truth.
Until you and 6 kids you barely know in wet bathing suits have surrounded 9 chimpanzees outside of a Wendy's, you probably really don't know yourself, okay?
Yep. And we back.
Hello and welcome. You're listening to your new favorite podcast and the best in political, sports, and paranormal news coverage. I'm your host, Wes Anderson, and this is In the Shed. This is episode 16, so whether you're back for more or finding us for the first time this week, hey, thanks for tuning in. It's late Friday night, June 11th, and I'm in a shed in the backyard of my home in Alabama, all so I can hang out with you tools and talk about the latest headlines, stories, and rumors in the world of politics, sports, and the paranormal. I apologize if my voice sounds a little off tonight. Bear with me, I'm battling a little bit of a sinus infection. I thought I was out of the woods, but me and Flonase are going 12 rounds with illness once again. But I am on some meds, I'm on the mend, and we have a great show for you tonight. But first, I gotta tell you, my tools, yesterday, I got a haircut. That's right. Yesterday, I got a haircut. Got my beard lined up. It looks good. Your boy's looking fresher than a homegrown squash. I don't know if that's an actual saying, but if it isn't, it probably should be. Hashtag that mug. Put it on a t-shirt. Fresher than a homegrown squash. Getting my hair cut yesterday reminded me of this story. Happened a little while back, and it was truly one of the most embarrassing moments of my life. So I thought, who better to share my humiliation with than you, my babies? If you are like me, that is, someone with hair, you know the importance of finding the right barber. You can't be out in these streets looking like it's a dead ferret on your head or like you lost a bet. It's important. Your hair matters. So once you find the right barber, you have a loyalty and devotion to that barber that is only rivaled by your loyalty and devotion to your God and to your spouse. Like, that is the only person that is allowed to touch, trim, or cut your hair. Nobody else. It's like a Chinese restaurant up there. No substitutions. Like, I've played that game, and it never goes well. I've done the whole thing where you walk into the barber shop, and your person that usually cuts your hair isn't there, and you're like, well, all these folks are professionals. Let's just roll the dice. Let's give somebody else a chance. Let me go sit down in somebody else's chair. What's the worst that could happen? Mistake. Big mistake. It's a mistake. That's what could happen, is a mistake. You don't want a mistake up top of your head. Mistake every time. And I know this. I know that it's a mistake to do that. I've experienced it before. And yet, when it came time for a haircut a while back, this was the first haircut that I had received during the pandemic, right? So my hair was not looking very good, y'all. And my wife kept asking me to just let her do it. She's going to watch a YouTube video and give me a haircut. And I'm like, nah, shawty. I believe in you with my whole heart, but you're not about to touch my head. Put them scissors away. So I try to call the barbershop and make an appointment, right? But because of the pandemic, their phone was actually down. They had been closed for so long that their phone was like not even in operation, which is not a good sign. But I heard, because, you know, I live in a small town, so sometimes you just hear stuff. Sometimes it ain't even that you see it online or that you know about it, you just hear stuff. And I had heard that they were back open, and your boy needed a haircut. So I got in my Chevy Silverado 2017, was her shawty, and I drive down to the barbershop. I park the truck, I walk in, and they are, in fact, open, which makes me very happy. But quickly my elation turns into trepidation as I notice that my barber is not present. And I have a decision to make, my tools. Do I turn around and leave with my head looking a mess? Or do I allow for the possibility that if I sit down in someone else's chair, things could be made worse? Needless to say, I sat down in somebody's chair, and ooh, were things made worse. Like, this girl was pretty new to the shop, and she was cutting my hair. And I told her I wanted a hard part put in my hair. That's how I do my hair sometimes. I get a hard part in there. And she gets done with the whole haircut. The length is looking okay. It's not too bad. It's a little lacking in certain places, but I can live with it, you know what I'm saying? So then it comes time for the hard part, and she's like, okay, all done. How does it look? And I said, well, you ain't put the hard part in there yet. And she says, oh, right. Long pause. Too long. So she gets the clippers. She tilts my head over to the side, and she starts trying to put in the hard part. And she stops. And she says out loud to me, this is really hard. Like, yo, you are not supposed to say that to me out loud. I am trusting you with my head. You're not supposed to say to me that this is hard. I mean, what if your dentist is up in your mouth doing something with your grill and then he just stops? Oh, this is hard. What if your mechanic is working on your brakes and then just stops? This is no. You are supposed to be the trained expert talking about some this is hard. I just gave her the side glance, like, what you want me to do about it? I can't put a hard part in my own hair, now can I? So then she walks away. Yeah, she says, this is hard. And then she walks away. And I realize after a moment that she has come back with help. And she says to me, I have never done a hard part, and I can't do it. And this other lady, who also is not the person who cuts my hair, has to put in the hard part. So fast forward another couple months, we still in the midst of this pandemic, and your boy goes back for haircut number 2 of the pandemic. And I get into the barbershop, and again, the person that cuts my hair is nowhere to be found. So again, I have a decision to make. And again, I made the wrong choice. So I sign in, I wait. Girl calls me back. I go sit in the chair, explain to her what I want done to my hair. She's sitting there cutting on my hair. It's looking all right. Not too bad, not too good, but all right. And she's about to do the hard part. And so I open my mouth and I say to her, you know, the last time I got my hair cut, the girl ain't even know how to do a hard part. Can you believe that? Somebody working at a barbershop don't even know how to put the part in my head. Had to leave and go get somebody else to come and do it for her. Told me out loud, this is hard. It was both disappointing and hilarious. I'm saying all this out loud. I say this out loud to this young lady who's cutting my hair. She says nothing. Not even a smile. She starts doing my part. She get done, I look in the mirror, I'm thinking, that part don't look right. Our eyes meet, and I realize the mistake that I have made, because I have just spent 3 minutes out loud telling this young lady who has just put in a hard part in my hair about how the last time the girl did not know what she was doing. And y'all, it was the same girl. It was the same girl. I was sitting here telling her about her own incompetence. I was sitting here telling her the last time I was in here, this girl ain't know what she was doing. And it was her. She was the one that didn't know what she was doing. I ain't even realizing. I ain't even recognize her. She wasn't the one that usually cut my hair. A few months had passed, y'all. I could have just melted into the floor. I was so embarrassed. I was so embarrassed. Oh my gosh. Oh man, I felt so bad. Yeah, she not there. She not there no more. She not there no more. So, yeah. All right, enough of that. Let's get to some comments and corrections from last week's show. Keystone 128, Hanobia 107, Townsend 22. Still no Bigfoot invites. I'm thinking about looking for the city council of each of those places on Twitter and giving them a follow. Y'all think that would help? Does that sound like a good idea to you, my tools? You do know we have a Twitter now, don't you? We do. We're at about 260 followers, which I think after about 3 weeks or so is something. Do us a favor, would you? If you're hearing this right now, take a minute or two and do a couple things for us. Pretty please. If you have a Twitter account, look us up and hit the follow button. You can follow us on Twitter at InTheShed4. That's the @ and then InTheShed4 for some pretty great between episodes content. Secondarily, but equally as important, if you're listening to this, I would greatly appreciate if you could rate or review us on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, or wherever you're listening to this show right now. Doing so will help us be more easily accessible to potential listeners, and it'll get our little show out in front of more ears. We're continuing to grow this thing together. India is back. Our downloads have picked up there once again, which makes me incredibly happy. India makes up 15% of our listening audience, and I hope that all of you in India are doing well right now amidst the pandemic. France is also growing, making up 3% of our listenership. All aboard. And Australia, you are almost up to 1% of our total listenership. On last week's show, in talking about the drive-through safari, in which I drove my wife's Toyota Venza through, I mistakenly called one of the animals that we saw Campbell's. That's right. That really happened. There aren't any animals called Campbell's. Obviously, I meant camels. Slip of the tongue. In talking about my favorite NFL head football coach, Dan the Man Campbell, I somehow neglected to share with you that not only did he talk about his players biting kneecaps in his opening press conference after being hired, not only did he follow that up by suggesting on a podcast that he liked to have an actual literal lion on a chain at practice, but in his third act of greatness, Dan Campbell showed up to a press conference wearing a race car helmet. Yeah, a race car helmet. Why? Because Dan Campbell is crazy. All right, that's all the comments and corrections for this week. Let's get to some listener emails. Lance from Georgia writes, Wes, it was so cool to hear from your Meemaw. After hearing you talk about her so much, I feel like I know her. She was a lot of fun. Thanks for saying so, Lance. My Meemaw is a lot of fun. She's the greatest Meemaw around. And I was thrilled to have her on the show, even if it was just for a segment. I had a lot of fun with her. Maybe one day I can get her in the shed for an entire show. She told me she did not enjoy hearing herself on the podcast. But I told her that's normal. I don't like hearing my own voice recorded either. But you did, Mr. Lance. So thank you for letting us know. Ariel from Memphis writes, Wes, nobody cares. Nobody cares about you and your cousin's podcast war. Get to the show already. Wow. Well, Ariel, thank you for listening to the show. I'm glad that you desire for me to get to it. That means that you enjoyed the show, and I appreciate that. Yeah, I mean, probably most of you don't care about me and my cousin's podcast war, but he's got a good show. I've got a good show. He's my cousin, and I love him, and it's my show, my shed. So I have wanted to go to war with my cousin, and I have done so and been relatively successful, I would say. Thank you for writing into the show, Ariel. Jay from Charleston, South Carolina writes, Wes, love the back and forth between you and your cousin. It's hilarious. I think you got him pretty good. Look at that, Ariel. Ariel done said that nobody cares. And my boy, who was it, Jay? Yeah, my boy Jay from Charleston, South Carolina comes right in behind her in the clutch and says, actually, he thinks it's hilarious. The back and forth between us here on In the Shed with Wes and my cousin over at 8 Bits and Bobbles. Jay thinks it's hilarious, Ariel. So he has proved you wrong. You said nobody cares. It turns out, actually, at least one person does. Thank you for writing in, Jay. Elizabeth from Rhode Island says, Wes, I have a paranormal experience to share. Hey, well, go ahead, Elizabeth. What you got? When I was 5, my family moved into a new house. It was the first time I didn't have to share a room with my sister. For the first 3 weeks in my new room, I suffered nosebleeds and night terrors on a regular basis. My parents thought it was just allergies or my being nervous about being in my own room alone at night. A couple months passed and a neighbor girl invited me to go to church with her. She even gave me a Bible that I put on my nightstand. After receiving the Bible as a gift and placing it on my nightstand, the nosebleeds and the night terrors stopped. Our family lived in that house for 10 more years, and it was only after moving out that we found out that the family who lived there prior to us were Satanists. It's always freaked me out. I can understand why, Elizabeth. That's a pretty freaky story. I appreciate you sharing that with us. I'd love to hear more about it in a subsequent email in the future. We found out that Satanists had lived in the house. How did you find out that they were Satanists? What evidence do you have to back that up? That is quite creepy. But the Bible, the good word of the Lord, proved to be your salvation. Hallelujah. And finally, Ben from Alabama writes, there is no way Texas A&M goes undefeated or that anyone finishes ahead of Alabama in the SEC West. A&M loses 4 games this year at least. Alabama wins the West and Auburn finishes with a losing record. Well, that is your opinion, Ben, and you are welcome to it. However, we made our selections here on In the Shed with Wes. That was our SEC West preview last week. And we feel like there's a possibility that Alabama may not win this year. I would not be surprised if they did. They will have a good team again. But I picked Texas A&M to come out on top. And I don't think Auburn will have a losing record. They may go 7-5. They may go 8-4. They won't have a losing record. That's our opinion. Thank you for writing into the show, Ben. You disagree, and that is quite all right. All right, let's switch to this. Let's get to the news in the world of politics. And let's hit the headlines. Chinese concentration camp victims endured months of torture, according to Breitbart. Governor Greg Abbott announces Texas will build its own border wall, writes the Post-Millennial. From the Hill, simmering Democratic tensions show signs of boiling over. Biden gives military $2 billion Trump allotted for border wall, says Bloomberg. And finally, climate justice for the first time ever is on the G7 agenda, and that is according to The Nation. Our first story in the world of politics, ABC legal analyst says all signs point to a likely indictment in Trump case. After Manhattan's district attorney convened a grand jury in an investigation into former President Donald Trump, one legal analyst thinks that an indictment appears likely. Dan Abrams, ABC News chief legal analyst, on Tuesday's The View discussed last week's news that Manhattan's district attorney convened a grand jury to weigh in on whether to indict Trump and other Trump Organization executives amid a probe into the former president's business practices. Abraham argued on The View that all signs point to a likely indictment, with these signs including the hiring of a very high-profile prosecutor to oversee the case and the grand jury being convened. Typically, you don't get a special grand jury like this unless they believe they have evidence of a crime, Abrams said per Mediaite. So all the evidence, all the signals are towards a likely indictment of someone, if not more than one person. In reporting on the fact that a grand jury had been convened, the Washington Post wrote that the move suggested the district attorney Cyrus Vance Jr. thinks he's found evidence of a crime, if not by Trump, by someone potentially close to him or by his company. On The View, Abrams noted that since this probe concerns Trump's conduct as a private citizen and not as president, it's a very different kind of investigation than he's ever faced before. So I've been upfront with you guys from the beginning. One thing that we will not do here on In the Shed is we're not going to pull out a Donald Trump story every week just for downloads, for clicks, for views, for listens, for ratings. That's what the news media has done for 4 years. And that's the reason why cable news networks' ratings have dropped immensely since the election and after Joe Biden has come into office. And we don't do reactionary politics here on In the Shed. The only way we will cover the former president is if he is connected to an actual news story. And in our first segment tonight, we have a couple of stories that fit the bill, with this being the first that a grand jury has been convened in New York City to examine whether or not crimes were committed by the Trump organization. Some on the far right are saying this is nothing more than a politically motivated witch hunt. Some on the far left are saying that Donald Trump will be in jail tomorrow, and the truth is probably somewhere in between. On the one hand, if this actually turns into something, if there is evidence there that criminal activity was going on within the Trump organization, someone will face legal repercussions for that. The question is, who will it be? At least from a front-facing public view, while in office as the president, Donald Trump relinquished many of his roles within his company to his children. So if there were crimes committed, would that protect the former president from facing direct prosecution? Is this going to be a situation where his business, his company, his corporation is fined, faces some different legal ramifications, maybe has to forfeit property or make restitution? Or is this the type of situation where they're looking at specific individuals within the company for decisions that they made and actions that they took? The only specific information that has hit the press so far is a report or two that's saying that one person that is being targeted or looked at or examined is the president's daughter, Ivanka Trump. The only value in this story to us here on In the Shed is for its newsworthiness, and right now, that's all that is newsworthy, is that there is a grand jury who has been convened to see whether or not someone or someone's needs to be indicted from the Trump organization based on evidence that a crime or crimes have been committed by that organization. And this is certainly unusual for someone who is a former president of the United States. This is not something that happens regularly, but nothing about Donald Trump is regular. Nothing about those that oppose him is regular. And we'll keep an eye on this to see where it goes. The adjacent story to that one, Trump is telling people he thinks he'll be reinstated as president in August, according to a report. Former President Donald Trump has been telling people that he thinks he'll return to the White House as the sitting president by August, the New York Times reporter Maggie Haberman tweeted on Tuesday. Haberman, who broke some of the biggest stories of the Trump administration and has been covering him for decades, added that Trump has been laser-focused on election audits in states whose results he is still trying to overturn. The anti-democratic conspiracy theory has been bubbling up in fringe conservative media groups for months, but has no basis under the Constitution or any legitimate legal framework. MyPillow CEO Mike Lindell has been a prominent proponent of the theory. The former Trump attorney Sidney Powell also floated the idea at a QAnon conference over the weekend. The anticipation of a Trump reinstatement on a certain date could spread further among the most dedicated Trump supporters. The calls to help overturn the 2020 election on January 6, for example, gained steam through a pro-Trump bus tour by a fringe group and led to the insurrection at the Capitol. Lindell has said August is when he would go to the Supreme Court to present evidence that he's acquired that would be so convincing that justices would be forced to reject the 2020 election results. A podcast from the former Trump advisor Steve Bannon has amplified the conspiracy theory, as Lindell and others have gone on the show to promote it with minimal pushback. The podcast is influential among GOP lawmakers hoping to avoid a primary challenge while seeking re-election. Trump's lawyers and other Republicans filed dozens of lawsuits related to the election, but all failed. Hey, let me be honest with you real quick. If you're listening to a podcast and it's not a comedy, and they start talking about Donald Trump being reinstated in office in August, which is 2 months away, turn off that podcast. Just like your body is affected by the diet that you take in and the food that you eat, so is your mind. And that is junk food extraordinaire. You're going to have some cavities, some jacked up teeth, a messed up grill, indigestion, and a little bit of bubble gut. Look, this show is not a Republican show. It's not a Democratic show. I am an independent when it comes to politics. Like I say on almost every episode, it is my belief that we need the left wing and the right wing for this bird to soar. The goal of American politics should be to find compromise, to find the things that we can agree upon and work together to accomplish, to make this country better and to make it a better place to live, to make sure that more of our people are taken care of than were previously. However, Donald Trump lost the 2020 presidential election. Was there possibly some voter fraud? Sure, I will give you that. Even my friends that are on the far, far, far right that believe the whole thing was a fix and was a conspiracy, to say that there was election fraud, there probably was to a degree. There probably was. There almost always is. People vote in the wrong state. People are registered to vote in multiple states. Have there been instances of people who are already deceased somehow casting a vote? Yes, all of those things can be true. But do I believe that thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands, I mean hundreds of thousands of votes were changed or thrown out so that Donald Trump would lose the presidency? No. I don't. I don't believe that because I haven't seen any evidence to show that. And even my friends on the far right that do believe that have not been able to show me any evidence that supports that. The only thing that I have seen is that there is evidence, and that there's going to be evidence, and that it's all going to come out, and that one day people will know, and that it's going to be in the court systems, and this is going to happen, and this is going to fall, and none of it ever comes out. None of it is ever shown because it isn't there. There's no there. And I have good friends. I have good friends who I really respect, who are not dumb people, okay? Who are good people, who voted Donald Trump because they vote Republican. That's just how they were raised. That's what they do. But then somewhere along the way, they got it into their minds that there's no possibility that Donald Trump could lose the presidential election. So when it was announced that, in fact, Joe Biden had won the presidential election, and Donald Trump started saying all of these things about how the election was rigged and fixed and this and that, and people started to echo it, and certain news organizations started to push it, my friend bought it hook, line, and sinker. My friend who I respect, my friend who I love, my friend who is not a dumb person. And I cordially and friendly asked him, where is the evidence? And he was not able to show me any evidence. Donald Trump is not the president. You might not like Joe Biden. You might not like Donald Trump. But Joe Biden is the current president now, just like Donald Trump was the president, even if you ain't like him when he was in office. Just like Obama was the president, even if you didn't care for him. Just like George Bush was the president, even if you didn't vote for him. And the truth is that every president does some good things. Every president does some bad things. Depending on your perspective, depending on the person and their character, the good may or may not outweigh the bad. But every president accomplishes some things, and every president drops the ball in some ways. But if you believe that the CEO of a pillow company is going to go before the Supreme Court and present evidence that the entire election of 2020 was a sham, and that our entire democracy is nothing more than an illusion, and that nothing is real, and that they're going to overturn it all, and that they're going to remove Joe Biden from president, and that they're going to place Donald Trump back in the White House, if that is what you believe, I just encourage you to ask yourself why. Why do you believe that? What is it that is making you think that way? Is it because those sentiments are based in reality and based on the evidence that you see? Or does it come from a hatred of the other side? Or does it come from an extreme loyalty to one personality or one person within your own party? Why? Why do you think that? Because it's not happening. The only way Donald Trump will ever be president again is if he decides to run again in 2024 and is elected. And all polls are showing that even if he decides to run right now, that is an extreme long shot. Our next story, North Korean fashion police and Kim Jong-un ban skinny jeans and mullets. That's right, mullets. Supreme leader of North Korea Kim Jong-un reportedly adhered to a call from a workers' union to ban skinny jeans, mullets, and certain body piercings in the country in order to avoid promoting a capitalistic lifestyle. I wonder what body piercings they banned. Are the ears okay? I'm guessing yes. The nose? Oh, we can't have that. And certainly not the navel. Kim Jong-un does not like a belly ring. South Korean news outlet Yonhap News Agency reported that the Rodong Sinmun, which is the official newspaper of North Korea's Central Committee of the Workers' Party of Korea, made an appeal to get rid of trends such as skinny jeans. These trends are viewed as a threat to the socialism movement and to avoid promoting a capitalistic lifestyle. History teaches us a crucial lesson that a country can become vulnerable and eventually collapse like a damp wall regardless of its economic and defense power if we do not hold on to our own lifestyle, the paper read according to the Yonhap News Agency. We must be wary of even the slightest sign of the capitalistic lifestyle and fight to get rid of them, the paper continued. I just like how they say, a country can become vulnerable and eventually collapse like a damp wall. That really illuminates the type of living conditions in North Korea. Y'all got walls collapsing because they damp. It wouldn't be a house left in the South. Because in the South, you know, it's not the heat that gets you. It's the humidity. Members of the state-run youth organization are said to often act as the country's fashion police, as their duties include stopping people from wearing clothes that are deemed too foreign. What clothes are too foreign? Like Kim Jong-un, every time I see him, he's in one of them Hillary Clinton pantsuits. So, I mean, is that the only thing allowed in North Korea? You wear a pair of Wranglers? That's too foreign. You wear a dashiki? That's too foreign. You wear some flip-flops made in Taiwan? That's too foreign. Like, what y'all wearing over there in North Korea? According to The Guardian, the communist regime has reportedly outlawed all but 15 hairstyles that will be considered non-socialist and has issued an order on proper hairstyles. Aside from skinny jeans and restricted hairstyles, branded t-shirts, lip and nose piercings are also banned. I told you them nose piercings was banned, shouty. I knew it. I knew Kim Jong-un, which is really ironic because Kim Jong-un is friends with Dennis Rodman. And he out here banning nose rings and hairstyles. Kim Jong-un is hilarious. Don't get me wrong now. He crazy as heck. That's a bad dude. He a bad man. But he hilarious, though. The use of any banned trend is now considered as anti-socialist behavior. Dictator Kim Jong-un is not generally loved on Twitter, but oddly enough, many tweeps seem to be in favor of the ban of skinny jeans. One tweep, I have never heard people on Twitter call it a tweep. Whatever. One tweep was happy for the country, saying, good for them. North Korea out here actually got some fashion police. It's not no reality TV show. It's not just a term. They actually literally out here with some fashion police talking about you can't dress like that because it's too foreign. Don't wear your hair like that, and you better not pierce the wrong thing because His Royal Majesty, little dodo bird. And then that man friends with Dennis Rodman in his Hillary Clinton pantsuit. He is a fashionista, that boy, Kim Jong-un. Fashionista. He gon' Kim Jong-un Fashion Week, I tell you what. Oh, man. Our next story, Jeffrey Epstein guards reach deal to avoid jail time. Federal authorities deferred prosecution of 2 employees who admitted to falsifying records the night the disgraced financier died by a suicide. Wink, wink, nod, nod. 2 federal correction employees accused of neglecting their duties the night Jeffrey Epstein killed himself, wink, wink, nod, nod, in a Manhattan jail cell in 2019 have reached an agreement with federal prosecutors to resolve the criminal charges against them without jail time, prosecutors said Friday. In a letter to the federal judge overseeing the case, the Manhattan U.S. Attorney's Office said the government had concluded that the interests of justice would be best served by deferring prosecution of Tova Noel and Michael Thomas. Under the agreement, Mrs. Noel and Mr. Thomas would admit completing falsified records, but would be spared a criminal conviction. Mrs. Noel and Mr. Thomas would have to cooperate with the Justice Department review into the circumstances surrounding Mr. Epstein's death. The judge still has to approve the agreement, which also would mandate 100 hours of community service. Lawyers for Mrs. Noel and Mr. Thomas didn't immediately respond to the request for comment. Mr. Thomas's lawyer argued when his client was charged that prosecutors should focus their efforts instead on fixing the prison system. Mrs. Noel and Mr. Thomas were charged in November 2019 with conspiracy. Really? They were charged with conspiracy. You don't say. And multiple counts of record falsification in connection with the death of Mr. Epstein weeks after his arrest on sex trafficking charges. Both pled not guilty and had rejected a plea deal offered in the weeks before their indictment. The indictment detailed lapses in security of the Manhattan jail the night of Mr. Epstein's death. By the time Mr. Thomas and Mrs. Noel found Mr. Epstein's body with a noose around his neck In his cell at around 6:30 a.m. August 10, 2019, at least 8 hours had passed since anybody had conducted a routine inmate check at the secure housing unit of the Metropolitan Correctional Institute, easy for me to say, in downtown Manhattan, prosecutors alleged. Instead of checking on Mr. Epstein throughout the night, as they were supposed to do, Mrs. Noel and Mr. Thomas spent most of the overnight shift in a common space just 15 feet from Mr. Epstein's cell, shopping online and sometimes sleeping. The guards filled out forms falsely saying that they had conducted the regular checks. The city medical examiner's office ruled Mr. Epstein's death a suicide, a wink wink and nod nod. The case exposed a history of staffing shortages and overworked guards within the Federal Bureau of Prisons, prompting the ouster of the Bureau's acting chief and an investigation by the Justice Department's Inspector General. So, let me get this straight. Jeffrey Epstein is arrested on federal sex trafficking charges. Jeffrey Epstein, who has millions and millions of dollars that nobody seems to know where he got it from, who allegedly made his money as a financier, but who many people have since testified saying, I know finances, I met with that man, he was no financier. Jeffrey Epstein, who has deep connections to many highly elected politicians, highly powerful people, the rich and the famous, who has dirt on who knows how many people, and he gets arrested, and he gets put in jail, and somehow, he's allowed the opportunity and the time to hang himself. Now, let's not even get into the fact that a world-renowned crime scene investigator has since said that the way his neck broke, that it was very unlikely that he did that to himself. Let's forget about that for a moment. And just look at the fact that he was given the time and the opportunity. Someone in such a high-profile case, things were left in his room that he could use to hang himself, and he was not checked on for 8 hours. And now, after the pandemic, a year and a half, 2 years later, the guards that allowed him to have the materials to hang himself, who did not check on him, who falsified the records, who said that they were asleep, who didn't notice that the cameras were turned off, those guards just so happened to reach a plea deal and face no jail time. And the DA has the audacity to say that it's in the interest of justice. It's in the interest of justice for them to face no jail time. We see you. We see you. Our last story in the world of politics. With Biden's support, the COVID lab leak theory goes mainstream. For months, the notion that the coronavirus came from a Chinese laboratory studying infectious diseases was dismissed as a conspiracy theory, a means for President Donald Trump and his supporters to deflect questions about their handling of the pandemic. That changed last week with the Biden administration coming to question the origin of the virus, even as the pandemic recedes across the United States. This shift doesn't reflect new evidence suggesting the virus did escape from a Chinese laboratory. Rather, the shift acknowledges that simply not enough is known about how the virus first infected humans to rule out that possibility. First, on Tuesday, Health and Human Service Secretary Xavier Becerra called for the World Health Organization to launch a new investigation into how the virus originated. He hoped that such an inquiry would be granted the independence to fully access the source of the virus in the early days of the outbreak, a clear reference to Beijing's lack of transparency. Even more significantly, Wednesday saw President Biden wade into the origin question. In a statement issued by the White House, Biden called on the intelligence community to prepare a report within the next 90 days that should include their most up-to-date analysis of the origins of COVID-19, including whether it emerged from human contact with an infected animal or from a laboratory accident. Later in the day, Principal Deputy Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre described the announcement as continuing of the president's interest in how the pandemic began. It seems clear that his interest has grown, as has displeasure with China. We need to get to the bottom of this, Jean-Pierre said. We have to get a better sense of the origin of COVID-19. She added that China needs to cooperate more fully than it has to this point with international investigators. The World Health Organization published a report earlier this year that seemed to endorse the popular hypothesis that the virus first jumped to humans at an open-air market in Wuhan where wildlife was sold. But even the World Health Organization's own chief, Dr. Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, conceded that investigators' access to Chinese institutions was limited. The lab leak hypothesis is alive and well, Stanford microbiologist David A. Relman told Yahoo News at the time. A growing number of scientists appear to be coming around to that view, a turnabout made easier by the fact that Trump is no longer tweeting daily about the Chinese virus or promulgating conspiracy theories from the White House briefing room. The intelligence community began looking at the origins of the coronavirus as early as April of last year. Analysts have focused in particular on whether the virus escaped from the Wuhan Institute of Virology because of poor biosecurity measures. The White House described the intelligence community as broadly divided on whether the virus came from a market or a laboratory. The position of most intelligence agencies, Wednesday's statement said, is that there is currently not sufficient information to assess one to be more likely than the other. There is no evidence whatsoever to support extreme claims like the one that holds that the virus was manufactured as a bioweapon. Less extreme claims, however, have gained traction. Republicans have continued to press the Biden administration on whether the National Institute of Health may have inadvertently funded research at the Wuhan Institute of Virology that supercharged the coronavirus pathogen for purely experimental purposes. Biden's call for a new investigation comes as he also makes the case that his infrastructure plan is necessary for the United States to maintain economic supremacy and counter China's rise. Trump made China a primary target of his foreign policy, and many charged him with exasperating anti-Asian sentiment throughout his last year in the White House. The rhetoric has changed under Biden, but animosity between Beijing and Washington remains. The president's call for a new investigation into the origins of the coronavirus is unlikely to help ease tensions, especially since Chinese leaders are deeply resistant to being blamed for the pandemic. Biden's statement called on China to cooperate with a full, transparent, evidence-based international investigation and to provide access to all relevant data and evidence. Beijing is highly unlikely to give way to such demands. World Health Organization investigators were given only perfunctory access to staff at the Wuhan Institute of Virology in their last examination of the facilities. My tools, this is at least a part of what is wrong with our media today. And I say that as someone who hosts a news podcast. A lighthearted one, yes, but still a news podcast. Now, Donald Trump said that the media is the enemy of the people, and I do not believe that to be true. However, when it comes to this whole issue of COVID-19, of the pandemic, of how this all began, there is no doubt whatsoever that a majority of our media had such dislike for Donald Trump and so believed that the things he was saying was stoking the fires of anti-Asian sentiment and racism, that they just could not bring themselves to examine the veracity of such claims that maybe, just maybe, this thing did not come from a wet market in Wuhan. And what happened was they allowed something that is not a partisan issue, is not left or right, is just mere science. The same people telling us to trust the science when it comes to vaccines, when it comes to masks. They took an issue of science and they turned it into something political. And instead of just saying, let's get to the bottom of this, let's figure out where this thing started, how it started, what were its origins, what could have been done to prevent it from going any further, how can we better handle things next time. Instead of starting there, they labeled it a conspiracy theory. The idea that COVID-19 came from anything other than a bat at a wet market was a conspiracy theory. All because they didn't like the person that was saying such things, which was Donald Trump. He wasn't the only one, but because he said it and he was labeled bad, then that must be bad also. And that's poor logic, my tools. That's poor logic. I get hate mail on this show all the time, people saying that I just bash Donald Trump. I've got a couple emails, people saying that I just support Donald Trump. No, I just call it like I see it. And I remember listening to a podcast, I think it was Joe Rogan, and he was talking with somebody on there and just saying that maybe, all he was saying was that maybe this came from some other source. And just for entertaining the idea, the left wanted that man to be canceled. They were calling him online things like a Trump supporter and MAGA, and saying that he was a neo-Nazi and all this crazy stuff because he was entertaining an idea that maybe it came from somewhere else. But now that the stumbling block that is Donald Trump is out of the White House, you're starting to see people take a second look. And it doesn't look good, Because on the one hand, is it possible that it came from a wet market? Okay, if scientists tell me that's a possibility, I am inclined to believe that that is a possibility. But there are now reports, and I don't mean from like Breitbart or InfoWars or Alex Jones. I mean reports from like the New York Times, from CNN, from a host, from the BBC, from a host of news sources. There are reports that 3 doctors from the lab in Wuhan were sick with flu-like symptoms, with COVID-19-like symptoms, back before this whole thing happened. And it just so happens that there's a lab in Wuhan where they work with this exact type of pathogen. And it just so happens that this very lab has been written up in the past for having lackluster security and lackluster safety precautions. And when the World Health Organization showed up to do their investigation, they were not allowed access to the labs. They were not able to examine things. They were not offered cooperation by the Chinese government. All they did was get to talk to a couple of the scientists. They spent all of an hour, and then they wrote a report saying, yeah, probably the wet market. Maybe the wet market, or maybe not. And we got to stop making things that aren't political into political things. This is a scientific question. And scientific questions don't care about left or right. They care about truth and error. And even some of my friends on the left say, well, it doesn't even matter how it started. What matters is the mismanagement of the reaction to the pandemic by the Trump administration and yada yada. No. Absolutely it matters how this thing originated. Because it matters who knew what and when. It matters because we need to know how to stop this thing from happening next time. Because we need to know who all failed and why they failed so that we can make sure it doesn't happen again. Were there cover-ups? Were there mistakes made? Are there protocols that need to be changed? It's possible it happened from a wet market, sure. I'm not throwing that out. I don't know. I'm not a scientist. But it's also possible that it came from a lab. And I'm not even saying anything nefarious happened. I'm not saying that it was a bioweapon created and released on purpose to cull the population. That is something I have heard online. I'm not saying that's true. It could have been an accident. It could have been those safety precautions. But to pretend that one thing is definitely true when we don't have the evidence to back that up, and to label everyone else that questions that presupposition as conspiracy theorists, that was wrong. It was wrong when Donald Trump was in office. It's wrong that there's just a 180 now and that nobody is saying boo about it. If you want people to trust the science, you got to trust the science too. I have no problem wearing a mask. I have no problem getting a vaccine. And I also have no problem honestly questioning how this whole thing even started in the first place. And neither should you. That's all for the world of politics. Let's switch to the world of sports, and let's hit the headlines. Raptors forward Pascal Siakam to have surgery and likely miss the start of the 2021-2022 basketball season. Clippers reserve Serge Ibaka out for the remainder of playoffs after back surgery. Giants cornerback Beal pleads guilty to firearm charges. Veteran cornerback Jonathan Joseph to retire after 15 seasons in the NFL. Linebacker Jones to transfer from Ole Miss to Kentucky. Alabama head football coach Nick Saban signs 3-year contract extension. And Gonzaga signee Chet Holmgren named Gatorade Player of the Year. Major League Baseball is looking to fix the problem of pitchers using foreign substances on the mound. And you know what that means? Absolutely nothing. We don't talk baseball on this podcast. Let's talk some NFL football. Our first story, retired black players say NFL brain injury payouts show bias. Thousands of retired black professional football players, their families, and supporters are demanding an end to the controversial use of race norming to determine which players are eligible for payouts in the NFL's $1 billion settlement of brain injury claims, a system expert says is discriminatory. Former Washington running back Ken Jenkins, now 60, and his wife Amy Lewis on Friday delivered 50,000 petitions demanding equal treatment for black players to senior U.S. District Judge Anita B. Brody in Philadelphia, who is overseeing the massive settlement. Former players who suffer dementia or other diagnoses can be eligible for a payout. Under the settlement, however, the NFL has insisted on using a scoring algorithm on the dementia testing that assumes black men start with lower cognitive skills than white men. Yo. They must therefore score much lower than whites to show enough mental decline to win an award. The practice, which went unnoticed until 2018, has made it harder for black former players to get awards. My reaction was, well, here we go again, said Jenkins, a former running back. It's the same old nonsense for black folks to have to deal with some insidious, convoluted deals that are being made. Jenkins is now an insurance executive and is not experiencing any cognitive problems, but has plenty of NFL friends who are less fortunate. NFL spokesman Brian McCarthy has declined to comment on the issue in the past and did not immediately return an email seeking comment on Friday. I wonder why. Brian ain't want to comment. The majority of the league's 20,000 retirees are black, and only a quarter of the more than 2,000 men who sought awards for early to moderate dementia have qualified under the testing program. Lawyers for black players have asked for details on how the $800 million in settlement payouts so far have broken along racial lines, but have yet to receive them. Race norming is sometimes used in medicine as a rough proxy for socioeconomic factors that can affect someone's health. Experts in neurology said the way it's used in the NFL settlement is too simplistic and restrictive and has the effect of systemically discriminating against black players. The first lawsuits accusing the NFL of hiding what it knew about the link between concussions and brain damage were filed in 2011. A trickle soon became a deluge, and the NFL, rather than risk a trial, agreed in 2013 to pay $765 million over 65 years for certain diagnoses, including Alzheimer's and dementia. The NFL, which foots the bill, began challenging claims by the hundreds, according to the claims website. In appealing one filed by Najee Davenport, the NFL complained that his doctor had not used full demographic norms in the cognitive scoring. That meant factoring in age, education, gender, and race. I remain unsure what you are talking about. He was done using standard norms like everyone else. Using different racial standards is indeed discriminatory and illegal. We stand by our scores, the physician said in response, according to court records. Ultimately, the appeal was reviewed by a pair of University of Pennsylvania legal scholars. They rejected the original reviewer's findings that race norms were mandatory under the settlement. Days later, Davenport and another former Pittsburgh Steeler, Kevin Henry, filed a civil rights lawsuit calling public attention to the issue for the first time. Their lawyers hope to learn through the litigation how often black players are denied payouts. Jennifer Manley, a Columbia University neuropsychologist hired by Davenport's lawyers, called race norms in medicine ill-conceived and outdated in a court filing. Race-based adjustments for neurology, known as Heaton norms, were designed in the early 1990s by Dr. Robert Heaton to estimate how socioeconomic factors affect someone's health. They're widely used, but in recent years, scientists in the field have begun to recognize the limitations of the normative comparison groups they've used for years. The small sample group of black people that Heaton chose to create his adjustment protocol came entirely from San Diego, a military town where the black population hardly reflects the diversity of blacks across the U.S. The racial classifications are also binary, black or white, even though hundreds of NFL retirees and millions of Americans identify as mixed race. White and black retired NFL players may be more similar to each other than they are to reference populations used to develop Heaton or other race-specific norms, Manley wrote in her brief in the Davenport lawsuit. Several neurology experts have said the NFL's assessment program is flawed. Norming by race is not the stance the NFL ought to take, said Dr. Art Kaplan, a New York University medical ethicist. It continues to look as if it's trying to exclude people rather than trying to do what's right, which is to help people that clinically have obvious and severe disability. He noted that the long history of racial bias in medicine includes the long-held myth that black people feel less pain. There's always been this race norming in medicine, he said, that has been problematic because it's tied in too closely to racism. Jenkins, the former Washington player, believes it all comes down to money. Race norming may have had a benign origin, but it quickly morphed into a tool that can be used to help the folks in power save money, he said. Yo, I can't hardly believe what I just read. Like, I'm sorry, what year is it? Is it 1960? I can't believe I just read an article like that in the year 2021. Do you understand what that article is saying? An overwhelming majority of the 20,000 people who have retired from the NFL, who are entitled to part of this $1 billion settlement, if they experience neurological issues, Alzheimer's, dementia, because of CTE or head trauma issues that the NFL knew about and covered up for years, because they're entitled to that. A majority of them are African American. And the NFL, rather than grant those people the money that they are entitled to legally, challenges, time after time, challenges their claim and uses a system to do so in which black people start out with a much lower cognitive score than white people. Meaning the assumption by the NFL is that black people are inherently dumber, are inherently less intelligent, are inherently less able, whose brains inherently do not function as well or as clearly as their white counterparts. And the reason they uphold these assumptions is so that these retired black players, when tested, will have to score so much lower because they started out so much lower to show that there has been such a great drop-off that they now qualify for the settlement that they're entitled to. This is happening in America in 2021, and some of y'all want to tell me that there's no such thing as systemic racism. There's no racism built into our society, that everybody has a fair shake. This is wrong. It's disgusting. And this whole race norming thing, the article says that it happens in medicine, and it absolutely does happen in medicine, because study after study after study, by Harvard, by Yale, all kinds of different places show that our African American brothers and sisters do not get the same treatment in hospitals when they are taken care of by white doctors and nurses. The percentage at which black mothers die giving birth is so many more times that of white mothers. The percentage of people who are black who sit in the ER awaiting service for more serious issues without receiving it is so much higher than that of their white brothers and sisters. Too often those who have just given birth, or those who are experiencing chronic pain, or those who are in need of assistance in their hospital bed, do not receive the attention, or are looked upon as though they're trying to get attention or they're a nuisance rather than given the help that they need. And it's wrong. Why is the NFL like this, man? Why is the NFL like this? When it comes to issues of race and issues of gender, issues of sexism, they always find a way to screw it up, don't they? They always find a way to be on the wrong side of morality. The NFL. People out here wanting to boycott the NBA. People out here wanting to complain because NBA basketball players use their position to push for social change that they believe in. The NFL out here in 2021, not giving settlement money that's legally been awarded and using a system that insists that black people are cognitively inferior in order to do so. That's just shameful. It's shameful, it's immoral, it's wrong, it's sickening. And we gotta speak up when we see these things. Go find this article and share it on your Twitter feed. Share it on your Facebook feed. Let people know this is happening. Let people know where you stand. Make your voice heard. Otherwise, nothing will change. I believe you got to be the change that you want to see in this world. And part of that is using your platform. Part of that is using your relationships. Part of that is using your voice. And I'm nobody special. I'm just a guy sitting in the shed at 11:47 p.m. in Alabama. But it's a whole host of people that don't look like me, that I care about, that I consider family, that I consider brothers and sisters. And this junk right here makes me mad. And injustice makes me mad. And racism makes me mad. And I won't tolerate it. I won't stand for it. And I won't be quiet either. I was going to cover another story in depth when it comes to the NFL, but I'm a little bit fired up. So I'm just going to give you the Cliff Notes version. Julio Jones, wide receiver from the Atlanta Falcons, their greatest wide receiver in team history, has been traded to the Tennessee Titans for a second and a fourth round pick. Yeah, a second and a fourth round pick. So now the Tennessee Titans have Ryan Tannehill under center, Julio Jones on one side, A.J. Brown on the other, and Derrick Henry in the backfield, and that sounds pretty good. That sounds pretty good. But the question is, does this make the Tennessee Titans a Super Bowl contender? No. Sorry to burst your bubble, Tennessee fans. No. Does it balance out their offense a little bit? Yeah, maybe. Does it give them another threat? Sure. But their defense is not championship level. The good players they have on defense are old. They struggled to rush the passer last year. They struggled in the defensive backfield. They're lacking in too many areas. This takes pressure off of Derrick Henry. It puts more pressure on Ryan Tannehill. And it might make them a slightly better football team. But look, they were a pretty good team last year and the year before, all right? Did Pat Mahomes also retire? Because I didn't hear that. To me, this just elevates them to the level of like maybe the Cleveland Browns. Like, you know, Tennessee's going to be a good football team. They'll win some games. They should be in the playoffs. They'll have a shot in their division. But Super Bowl? Why? Why? Because they added over-the-hill Julio Jones that we're not even sure can be healthy? What did he play, like 9 games last year, 10 games? Is he even going to be on the field for Tennessee? It's a 17-game season now. How many games is he going to play? 12? This makes the Titans better. It does not make them a Super Bowl favorite. Probably not even a Super Bowl contender. That's all for the NFL. Let's move to the NBA. And before we talk about the playoffs, let's talk a little bit about the Boston Celtics. Because in between our two shows, the one we recorded last week and this one, Danny Ainge is out as president of basketball operations and Brad Stevens is in. Now, when I heard that on the radio, I was not at all surprised that Danny Ainge was out. Because we have said on this show before, Brad Stevens is a top 10 NBA coach easily. People in Boston have really complained about Brad Stevens. And have talked about how Brad Stevens cannot manage stars. And how Brad Stevens this and Brad Stevens that. And he's lost the team and yada, yada, yada. Let me tell you something. Every team in the NBA outside of about 6 would be thrilled to have Brad Stevens as their head coach. Brad Stevens was not the problem. The problem was roster construction. And overall, I think Danny Ainge actually did a pretty decent job during his tenure. But once he had Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown, he liked them too much. And the comparison we made before, Danny Ainge became like the person at your yard sale that picks up every single item on the table and looks at it and asks how much it cost and then puts it down and walks away without buying anything. That was Danny Ainge. Because Danny Ainge had opportunities the last several seasons to make changes, to make trades, to use the assets that he had garnered in order to make big things happen for Boston, and he never could pull the trigger. He got stuck between trying to build for the future and also be competitive in the present. And what happened was he got stuck with a roster that was just inefficient. So I wasn't surprised that Danny Ainge was out. I was a little surprised that Brad Stevens was in. But when I saw that Brad Stevens was now the president of basketball operations, I thought that what that meant was that he was going to be the head coach and the GM. When I saw that he was no longer going to be the head coach, that was pretty surprising. I guess Brad Stevens just wants a new challenge. I guess he is burnt out on coaching. And so now you have an interesting situation where the coach moves up into the front office and then hires his own replacement. How often does that happen? So who is Boston going to look at? I know they've already interviewed 2 or 3 assistants from within their own organization. I think those were just for show. They've got to go outside their own organization. I'm looking at someone like Chauncey Billups. Great NBA player, floor general, experience as an assistant on the bench. Or would they take a shot at trying to swoop in and get Nate McMillan before he signs a permanent deal with the Atlanta Hawks? If the Clippers fall apart and decide to blow things up, will they take a look at someone like Ty Lue? It's going to be interesting to see who they bring in as head coach, whether it's going to be somebody that matches a similar philosophy of Brad Stevens or someone that does things completely differently. It's also going to be interesting to see what Brad Stevens does with that roster that he's been left. Because if anyone, and this is the interesting thing, people were all up in arms, Brad Stevens has no experience in the front office. Why has Brad Stevens been given this job? He didn't even earn it and blah, 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 blah. If there's anybody that understands the inadequacies and the insufficiencies, I should say, of the Boston roster, Who better than Brad Stevens, who's had to use that roster and try and compete on the NBA level? What are they going to do with Kemba Walker? It's a bad contract. What are they going to do with Jaylen Brown? What are they going to do with Marcus Smart? And already you hear a couple of blockbuster trade ideas thrown out there for the Celtics. I was reading one today that suggested that the Celtics trade a package of Kemba Walker and Jaylen Brown and some draft picks for Dame Lillard. And like, if you're the Celtics, would you do that trade? 100 times out of 10. 100 times out of 10 you would do that trade. But I don't think it's going to happen. I don't think Portland would trade Dame Lillard for Kemba Walker, Jaylen Brown, and some draft picks. Even if Dame asked out. Even if Dame said, trade me, I don't think they're making that trade. But B, I don't expect Damian Lillard to want to go anywhere. Damian Lillard is loyal to Portland. Damian Lillard has made it clear that he wants to build in Portland. He wants to try and chase a ring in Portland. He doesn't want to do this whole team up thing. That's not how he does things. That's not him. And I respect that. So I don't think they can trade for Dame Lillard. Another name I've heard is Porzingis. The unicorn has not looked like a unicorn paired next to Luka Doncic. Him and Luka don't get along. Porzingis was terrible in the playoffs. Terrible. But he's a 7-foot-plus player who can shoot the ball, who can handle it. He does bring a lot to the table. And when he has a more defined role and is feeling confident in that role, he does bring a certain swagger to his team. So would it be a mutually beneficial trade for the Celtics to look at swapping Jaylen Brown for Porzingis? I think it would unquestionably help the Mavericks. I think that Jaylen Brown, at his age and the skill set that he brings, his toughness, his defense, I think that it's something that the Mavericks need. And the added height with a stretch 4, stretch 5 could be something that would be very interesting in Boston, especially if they wound up keeping Kemba Walker with some pick and rolls. Alleviate a little bit of the pressure of Jason Tatum on offense if Porzingis can round back into form. So I like that one better than the Dame Lillard one simply because I believe it's more realistic. It's going to be interesting to see what Brad Stevens does. This is going to be a pivotal offense for the Celtics' future. Depending on how they handle things, they can be in the top 4 in the East next year, or they could be rebuilding for the next 5 years. So Danny Ainge is out, Brad Stevens is in, and we'll keep an eye on things there in Boston. Let's talk NBA playoffs. In the West, the Jazz are up 2-0 over the LA Clippers. Now, I picked the Clippers in 6. That's not seeming to work out so well so far. Now, we've seen this before with the Clippers seeming disinterested and not playing up to their potential. Kawhi Leonard, the last game, did not play well at all. He scored 21 points. Paul George has been ineffective and inefficient in both games of the series. And the series so far has been dominated by Donovan Mitchell and Rudy Gobert. Those two guys have dominated this series. The Jazz have exposed the Clippers. The Clippers were unable, even with Paul George and Kawhi Leonard, they were somehow unable to guard Luka Doncic. And now, in this round, somehow they're unable to guard Donovan Mitchell. Ty Lue in Game 2 was grasping at straws, trying to change up his lineup, trying to find guys to put in minutes for different folks to kind of spark things, and nothing seeming to work. We'll find out who the Clippers are and what they're about as the series returns to Los Angeles. Will it be like the last round? Will the Clippers, down 2-0 in the series, kind of come back, come awake? Will Kawhi Leonard focus in, hone his craft, and dominate? Or will the Jazz, who are the top seed, who did have the best record in the league, will they wipe the floor with the Clippers? My prediction was Clippers in 6. It's still a possibility, but right now, at least, it's looking unlikely. Also in the West, the Suns now have a 3-0 lead over the Denver Nuggets. In this series, I picked the Suns in 7, and it doesn't look like it's going to take 7 games. Phoenix has been the better team in every game so far, blowing out the Nuggets the first 2 games in Phoenix. And then tonight, going into Denver, on the night that Nikola Jokic was handed the MVP award, and they beat them in their home gym to take a commanding 3-0 lead. And the Suns have just proved to be a better team. Chris Paul has looked healthier and healthier. Chris Paul, over the last 5 games, this 5-game winning streak, this man has less turnovers total in 5 games than it took me years to finish my college degree. Yeah. Because in those 5 games, Chris Paul has 4 turnovers total. And your boy took a victory lap. It took me 5 years, but I got that degree. What's up, shouty? The Suns are just a deeper team than the better team. Devin Booker has been the best player on the court. Jokic has played well at times, but he can't do it by himself. If Jamal Murray were healthy, this might be a different series. But the Suns just seem like a team of destiny, and they seem like the team that is playing the best in the West right now. If it does indeed wind up being them and the Jazz, that will be a heck of a series. But the Suns are up 3-0 there. In the East, the Nets have a 2-1 lead over the Bucks. I picked the Bucks in 7. I don't know why. I thought the Bucks would be a good matchup for the Nets because I thought that Giannis would take on the challenge of guarding Kevin Durant, but instead, the Bucks insist on guarding Kevin Durant with 6'5" PJ Tucker. So the entire game, Kevin Durant comes off of a screen, and even when PJ Tucker fights through the screen admirably, Kevin Durant just has like a wide open jump shot because he's 7 feet tall, and PJ Tucker is 6'5". I don't get it. And the Bucks won the first game in Milwaukee, so they're not out of it yet. They're still in this series technically, but they didn't look good doing it. Mike Budenholzer looked lost on the sidelines. Giannis was terribly inefficient. The man got called for a 10-second violation shooting a free throw, and he airballed a second one. This is a 2-time MVP, and he can't even get a free throw up in less than 10 seconds. He shot 1 of 8 from 3, but kept shooting them. Like, bruh, that's not your game. That's not your game, big dog. Get in the post. Get on the break. Get off the ball. Set you a screen and then roll hard to the basket. That's your game. You let Chris Middleton shoot from the outside, and please, somebody wake up Jrue Holiday, because that man sleptwalked through that game. I've never seen Jrue Holiday play such an insignificant game. And somehow the Bucks won. Kevin Durant scored 30 points, but he was inefficient. It took him 28 shots to get it. The Nets weren't really dialed in, and the same thing happened in the first round. They dropped a game to the Celtics, and everybody said, wait a second now. The Nets haven't been playing defense. And then the Nets wiped the floor with them. And even though I picked the Bucks in 7, I have no reason to believe that the same thing won't happen here, because the Nets had every opportunity to win this game. If I'm Mike Budenholzer, I'm putting Giannis on Kevin Durant almost the whole darn game. And I'm putting Jrue Holiday on Kyrie Irving. And I'm saying, you just stick with this man. Do not help. Do not leave. Do not do anything other than be in his right hip pocket. And then I'm going to see where my team goes and how things go. But unless they make some adjustments, unless they find a way to also win this next game, I don't think my prediction of Bucks in 7 is going to turn out to be a good one. And I don't even want to talk about the other series. The 76ers and the Hawks. The 76ers took a 2-1 lead tonight going into Atlanta and grabbing back home court advantage, and it wasn't even close. It wasn't even close. I put out on Twitter, which, by the way, if you're on Twitter, follow us @InTheShed4. I put out on Twitter that the reason the Hawks lost the last game was not because Trae Young only scored 21 points, but it was because Atlanta's shooters did not hit shots in key moments and because Capella got into foul trouble early. If the Hawks shooters could make shots and Capella could stay out of foul trouble, the Hawks could win tonight, and their shooters did not hit shots. Kevin Huerter was terrible off the bench. Lou Williams looks over the hill in a Hawks uniform. Trae Young did not play well for a majority of the game. The Hawks had like 337 turnovers in the first quarter. And the whole game, all they could do on defense was foul. I mean, it looked like a middle school team as much as they were fouling. as many times in that first quarter as they threw the ball. Not even like, it wasn't even close. Like, they just threw it to the guy in the other jersey. Like 8 or 9 times in the first quarter. It was crazy. And so now the 76ers have a 2-1 lead, and the next game at home on Sunday is a must-win for Atlanta. It's a must-win for Atlanta if they want to stay in this series, if they want to have any chance. And Nate McMillan, who has done a tremendous coaching job, in my estimation, he's the coach of the year. He's going to have to make some adjustments because Doc Rivers has made adjustments and Nate McMillan has not. You got to find a way to get John Collins involved in the offense. You got to find a way to guard Joel Embiid without putting him on the free throw line 25 times a game. Now, granted, I've never seen a 7-footer that flails as much as Joel Embiid. Like usually guys like Shaq and Tim Duncan and even Zion Williamson, the bigger players who are in the post a lot, their coaches and those players complain because they don't get the foul calls. But Joel Embiid, he gets every foul call because if you breathe on that man, he's going to collapse, throw his head back 6 feet, and throw his entire body onto the floor. It's wild. But even so, that's how they're calling the games. You got to find a way to double and get the ball out of his hands, or you got to let him do his own thing and get his points but shut everybody else down. You got to make some type of adjustment, Nate McMillan. Atlanta's defense tonight was terrible. Their rotations were awful. Whenever they did double Embiid, they still gave up baseline to him on multiple occasions. They left guys wide open for threes time after time after time. Their transition defense was terrible. It was a mess. And you got a day and a half to fix it. Good luck. So in the first round, my predictions were spot on. And in the second round, things are not looking good for my predictions. I took the Clippers in 6. We'll see. I took the Suns in 7. That one's pretty good, although it's not going to take them 7. I took the Bucks in 7. Yeah, probably not happening. And I took the Hawks in 6. I thought Joel Embiid was going to be out, or at least hampered. I did not think he would score 40 points a night and shoot 25 free throws a game. But I digress. That's all for the world of sports. Let's switch to this, the world of the paranormal. Our first story takes us to the world of conspiracies. QAnon crowd convinced UFOs are a diversion from voter fraud. It's never been a better time to believe in UFOs. Barack Obama talked last week about inexplicable footage of identified aerial phenomena. 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 And former Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid wrote about his trip to Area 51 in a recent op-ed. In June, that's this month, shouty, American intelligence agencies are set to release an unclassified report on what the government knows about UFOs. For UFOologists, long mocked as tinfoil hat wearers obsessed with little green men, some measure of vindication may finally be at hand. But for many UFO enthusiasts on the right, this new round of UFO disclosures is nothing to cheer about. Instead, they're claiming the new videos of possible UFO sightings are meant to distract people from Donald Trump's baseless voter fraud allegations and conspiracy theories about the coronavirus pandemic. There's no doubt that this mainstream UFO disclosure push is offering a convenient distraction from the deep state to turn our attention away from important issues like the scamdemic and the election fraud getting exposed. Jordan Sather, a UFO and QAnon conspiracy theorist, complained on social media network Telegram on May 19th. Sather, who's griped that interest in UFOs has just become a way for left-wing social justice warriors to virtue signal, typifies the response. At a moment when longtime UFO promoters are soaking in the mainstream of UFO discussion, many conspiracy theorists on the right instead see the sinister hand of a global cabal at play. Conspiracy theory hub InfoWars often posts articles about UFOs, but more recently, InfoWars has started to see the prospect of extraterrestrial revelations as a deep state plot. In an April video, InfoWars staffer Greg Reese posited that the UFOs were being faked using technology from inventor Nikola Tesla and the Nazis, with the ultimate goal of faking an alien invasion to enslave humanity in the most dire false flag imaginable. That sounds like a dope movie though, don't it? I would go see that. That sounds like a super dope movie. Like, write the screenplay. Let's go. In QAnon-heavy language about a nefarious cabal and a great awakening, Reese claimed that the new UFO videos were meant to convince people wrongly that the aliens are real before vaporizing much of humanity with energy weapons. We know the cabal has the will to do this, and it seems they have the means as well, Reese said. Do they really? They have the means to just be vaporizing people? That's terrifying. The claims that an evil cabal is behind the new wave of interest in UFOs reflects the growing overlap between the UFO disclosure community and other conspiracy theory movements, especially QAnon. Believing in UFOs means buying into what Syracuse University professor Michael Birkin, an expert on conspiracy theories, has dubbed stigmatized knowledge, embracing a universe of ideas that's been dismissed by the mainstream. People who have already embraced one form of stigmatized knowledge often find it easy to sign on for another, according to Birkin, going from New Age healing crystals to UFOs, or from anti-vaccine activism to QAnon. UFOologist Stephen Greer, for example, has claimed that UFO promoters were assassinated by intelligence agents to prevent them from telling the truth about UFOs. With the prospect of some genuine disclosures in the offing, Greer has decided that whatever comes from the government is in fact a trick meant to hide the genuine facts about UFOs. This is the ramping up of false disclosure that we warned about, Greer warned his fans in a YouTube video last week, claiming that the UFOs were wrongly being portrayed as a national security threat. Sather and other QAnon conspiracy theorists who promoted UFOs are challenged by the prospect of more widespread UFO interest, according to Travis View, the co-host of QAnon tracking podcast, QAnon Anonymous. QAnon promoters gain an audience by claiming that they have access to information that the mainstream media doesn't, View told the Daily Beast. When major outlets report on their pet topics such as UFOs, it's actually damaging to their brand because their audience has been trained to distrust everything that comes from the mainstream media. The idea that UFO revelations are being used to distract people has also been embraced by white nationalists in the United States. One cartoon that's become popular meme on extremist Telegram channels shows slack-jawed UFO believers excited to see aliens who urge Earthlings to unite behind a single world government. Behind the scenes, though, the cartoon reveals that the aliens are the creation of a projector operated by a man wearing a blue United Nations helmet. UFO as distraction theory has also gained more mainstream traction on the pro-Trump right. On May 19th, Newsmax White House correspondent Emerald Robinson tweeted that the UFO footage was a diversion meant to draw attention away from, among other things, the controversial Republican-led recount of presidential election ballots in Arizona's Maricopa County. They want you talking about aliens because they don't want you talking about Maricopa, Robinson wrote. They want you talking about UFOs because they don't want you talking about stagflation, the collapse of the dollar, the crisis of the border, and Biden's mental health. QAnon be wildin'. Them QAnon folks, man, they don't give up. Them folks are committed people. Them are some like real committed people. Because I was keeping up with them online, leading up to and before and right after the election. And all the things that they said was going to happen. The people that were going to be arrested, and the news and the truth that was going to come out. Not one iota of it happened. And all the timelines passed by. And yet, these folks still around. And these folks still blaming everything on a secret cabal of Satan-worshiping pedophiles that control the inner workings of the government. Now, rest assured, it's some pretty godless people working in our government. And it's definitely some people on both sides of the aisle that have been outed as or arrested as pedophiles. But if you believe that Hillary Clinton, whatever you think about her as a person, if you believe that she's out here drinking children's blood as a part of a satanic ritual, I don't know where we go from there. So these QAnon folks right here could write a pretty dope movie based on this article. And I even have mentioned, I think on the last episode, I mentioned the idea. This is one thing we have in common, QAnon. I mentioned the idea of these things in the sky that we're seeing that the government is saying is actually real. It could be some type of projection. Like that's one possibility I threw out there even. And I would not put it past our government to be less than honest with us. Let's be real. Let's keep it 100. But I don't think that the UFO disclosure that's coming or that's happened or that is happening, I don't think that it's all a big hoax to cover up the collapse of the American dollar or the recount of the vote in Maricopa County, Arizona, or this giant cabal of Satan-worshiping pedophiles. I am not a Satan worshiper. I have no love lost for pedophiles and think they should face justice in full. But, hey, QAnon, stop cosplaying with democracy. From the world of conspiracy theories, we go to the woods of Oregon for our next story. He got the FBI to test Bigfoot hair in the 1970s, and this 93-year-old man is still searching for Sasquatch. An Oregon man intent on proving the existence of the mythical creature known as Bigfoot, Sasquatch, the Abominable Snowman, and the Yeti in 1976 managed to get the FBI to test hair and tissue samples that he believed might help his case, according to newly released records. The FBI has analyzed hair in connection with the search for Sasquatch, aka Bigfoot, an internal FBI memo noted in February 1977. On Wednesday, the same man who spurred that analysis, 93-year-old Peter Byrne, told CNBC that he still hasn't given up hope of proving that Bigfoot is a real, if exceedingly rare, creature. It's a great challenge, Byrne said when asked to explain his interest over 9 decades in finding creatures widely believed to be figments of imagination or the inventions of con men. Byrne's webpage says that he's always had an interest in the unknown and the mysterious since his father used to tell him bedtime stories about the Yeti of the Himalayas. The page says his first opportunity to go looking for the Yeti occurred in 1946 when he was still in the British Royal Air Force in Bombay, India. A photo on that page shows him with the famous Yeti scalp at a temple in the Himalayas in Nepal in 1958. Another photo shows a very big footprint of a possible Bigfoot. His desire to see a Yeti for himself led him to launch 3 extensive expeditions searching for the Yeti in Nepal in the late 1950s. Byrne said that in the past 50 years he had found 2 or 3 sets of possible Yeti footprints with 5 toes on each foot left in the tracks in the Himalayas at altitudes of 15,000 feet. But he conceded Wednesday that those prints could have been left by Hindu holy men or sadhus whom he's seen walking barefoot in the snow at such heights. After moving to the U.S. in the 1960s, Byrne went on to direct the Bigfoot Information Center and exhibition in Oregon. With the backing of what he said were wealthy men, he tried to find conclusive evidence of Bigfoot, also known as Sasquatch, in America's Pacific Northwest. I was in it full time, 7 days a week, Byrne said of his earlier Bigfoot hunts, which last were funded in the 1990s. Right now, I'm still active, Byrne said. We have motion-sensitive cameras out in the mountains of Oregon, he said. But he added, it's a hobby for me now. When told about the FBI document showing his correspondence with the agency in the 70s asking it to test hair samples, Byrne chuckled. He said, I don't remember this. It's out of my memory, he added, while noting that he does recall asking the FBI in the 70s about an incident at a campground in Washington state where a Bigfoot was suspected. However, FBI records disclosed by the agency on its public documents page showed that in 1976, Byrne repeatedly wrote the FBI asking for the test to be conducted on both hair his group had obtained and on other samples that he had heard might be in the agency's possession. We do not often come across hair which we are unable to identify, and the hair that we have now, about 15 hairs attached to a tiny piece of skin, is the first that we've obtained in 6 years which we feel may be of importance, Byrne wrote in a November 24, 1976 letter to FBI Assistant Director J. Cochran, Jr. In an earlier letter in August of that year, Byrne had asked if hair supposedly of a Bigfoot that he believed had been sent to the FBI by others had been examined. Will you kindly set the record straight once and for all? Inform us if the FBI has examined hair in which that might be of a Bigfoot, when this took place, and if it did take place, what the results of the analysis were, he wrote. Please understand that our research here is serious, Byrne wrote, that this is a serious question that needs answering. In a response finally sent to Byrne on December 15, 1976, Cochran of the Bureau's Scientific and Technical Services Division noted that the FBI laboratory normally conducts examinations of physical evidence for law enforcement agencies in connection with criminal investigations. But Cochran added, occasionally, on a case-by-case basis, in the interest of research and scientific inquiry, we make exceptions to the general policy. We will examine the hairs and tissue mentioned in your letter, Cochran wrote to Byrne. It was the first time that the FBI apparently tested a sample of hair to see if it was a Bigfoot, according to the records, which contains photocopied images of the hairs. The FBI acted relatively quickly after Cochran told Byrne the test would be done. In February 1977, Cochran wrote Howard Curtis, Executive Vice President of the Academy of Applied Sciences in Boston, which had a relationship with Byrne's Bigfoot group. The Academy had been the chief sponsor of a search for the Loch Ness Monster in Scotland. Cochran's letter noted that the results were being sent to Curtis at his request because Mr. Byrne will be out of the country for several months. Byrne, according to Curtis, was in Nepal at the time. Cochran said the examination of hair included a study of morphological characteristics such as root structure, medullary structure, and cuticle thickness in addition to scale casts. Also, the hairs were compared directly with hairs of known origin under a comparison microscope, he added. At the end of all that, it was concluded as a result of these examinations that the hairs are of a deer family origin, Cochran wrote. The hair sample you submitted is being returned as an enclosure in this letter. Even though he does not recall that test being performed or the FBI's conclusion, more than 40 years later, Byrne still dreams of finding a Bigfoot. No, Byrne answered ruefully when asked if he'd ever actually seen a Yeti or a Bigfoot himself. I'd love to see one. There's been sightings, he said. He noted that he once found in the Pacific Northwest a huge footprint of what would have been an upright mammal with 5 toes on each foot and a 46-inch stride. And we had a sighting 10 days ago of a Bigfoot from a very reliable, very good friend of mine, Burns said. Last year, he said, there was a sighting of a suspected Sasquatch by 7 loggers who were surprised to see a huge creature ambling their way. When it came to believing in Bigfoot, Byrne noted, those men were all totally skeptical until right then. All right, so that's a fun story there. A lot of serious stories tonight on the show, a lot of heavy stuff. That one was a little bit lighter. The FBI actually tested some hair to see if it was Bigfoot hair in the 70s. Apparently, if you write 3 or 4 letters to the FBI, they will conduct scientific experiments on your behalf. Who knew? I might be writing some letters tonight. I have some scientific testing that I would like them to do. It seems like the FBI in the 1970s was much more polite than today. Much less clandestine. I don't know. Like, just write some letters and they'd be like, all right, fine. You know, usually we out here solving crimes, but I guess we can test these hairs for you and see if they belong to a Bigfoot. But the thing that I've always wondered about these tests, they find these hairs, these guys out in the field. How is that helpful? Because I would think, and I'm not a scientist, I'm just a guy in the shed in Alabama. I don't know very much, but I would think that even if it was a Bigfoot hair, it would just come back as unidentified, right? And if it came back as unidentified or as something that they don't recognize, it wouldn't be assumed, oh, this is absolute proof that Bigfoot is real. It would just be, well, the tests are inconclusive. Well, we're not sure what it is. We don't have a definitive answer for you. So I'm not sure how those tests are ever actually helpful. I feel like if there is a Bigfoot, and I've said before, like I'm a hopeful skeptic, like I think it'd be cool if there's like some type of primitive man or some type of large ape that is not known to be in existence in the woods in North America, or if there is some type of creature that we thought was extinct but there's a few left. Like those would all be interesting and cool things. But the only way that it'll ever be proven definitively is if you have a body or if you have some undisputed footage. And I know there's the Patterson-Gimlin film, but there's so many people that believe that to be a hoax. And there's one man that came out and said that he, in fact, was the one that hoaxed it and was the Bigfoot in the video. I don't believe he's telling the truth because he's like a 5'6" man. And that creature was obviously taller. But I've always wondered, you know, they got these shows finding Bigfoots like season 10. I've always wondered why, like, they don't just raise several $1 million and take like 4 or 5 different locations across the country, like Oregon and California, Texas and Oklahoma, maybe the mountains of Tennessee or Carolina. 4 or 5 different locations where there have been the most Bigfoot sightings in America, and use this money to pay for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of trail cameras and have some people trek out into the woods. I mean like into the woods. I don't mean like at a campsite. I mean out into the brush, and put these trail cameras up and leave them out there for a year or 2. Have somebody monitor the feeds. Have somebody conduct maintenance when needed and see what you come up with. I bet if nothing else, even if not a Bigfoot, they would find some animal that they thought was extinct. It isn't, or that nobody's gotten a picture of in a really long time. It'd be scientifically viable, even if it didn't prove that Bigfoot exists. But I gotta think if there is a Bigfoot, that might be the way to do it. And I'm not talking about 20 cameras. I'm not talking about 4 or 5 cameras over a couple miles span. I'm talking about 4 or 5 locations, miles and miles and miles and miles and miles at each location with hundreds of cameras in different spots deep into the woods. That's what I'm talking about. I think it'd be interesting. If you're hearing this and you are a millionaire, you have millions of dollars, because you know it's some millionaires that listen to In the Shed. Email the show at intheshedwithwes@gmail.com. Give me your money. I'll find you Bigfoot. I'll find you Bigfoot. I might not even need millions and millions of dollars. Give me like 500 grand. Maybe 6. I'll find you Bigfoot. Do you believe in Bigfoot? Do you think Bigfoot is a myth? Do you think Bigfoot is real? What do you think Bigfoot is? Is Bigfoot some type of alien or apparition? Is Bigfoot some type of primitive man? Is it an ape? Is it some type of shapeshifter? Let us know what you think. Email the show at intheshedwithwes@gmail.com. We might even read it on the air. From the woods of Oregon, we go to a California prison for our next story. Satanist beheaded his cellmate and made a necklace of his dismembered body parts without guards at a California jail noticing, report says. Remind me not to ever be put in a California jail. Good Lord. Just by reading that headline, I'm like, yo, I didn't want to go to jail before, but now, if I ever do commit a felony, and I'm talking felonies, it will not be in the state of California. Satanist beheaded his cellmate and made a necklace of his dismembered body parts without guards at California jail noticing. Dang. Dang. Also, that's a really long headline, but I digress. A convicted killer decapitated and dissected the body of his cellmate without prison guards noticing, according to a Los Angeles Times report. Jamie Osuna, a 31-year-old self-styled Satanist, murdered his cellmate, Luis Romero, 44, on the morning of March 9, 2019, the paper reported. But prison guards reported that both inmates were alive and well after doing rounds of Corcoran State Prison, California, 2 new state documents seen by the Times said. Oh man, they're out here falsifying records just like in the Jeffrey Epstein case. I bet these jokers don't get off. I bet they don't strike a plea deal. Let's keep reading. Maybe we'll find out. The documents accuse the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation of conducting an inadequate investigation into the killing and delaying disciplinary action against the guards, according to the paper. The department disputes the findings. Romero's family has also filed a lawsuit alleging that the department has a veil of secrecy surrounding the brutal murder, the Times reported. The idea that my client had to sue in order to get basic questions answered about her son's death is disheartening, Justin Sterling, the attorney for Romero's family, told the paper. Sterling also suggested that had guards performed satisfactory checks, Romero would not be dead. The attorney added that Romero's murder would have taken hours to commit. When prison guards eventually arrived at the cell, they found Osuna wearing a necklace made of Romero's body parts, the Times said. Yo. He had cut out one of his victim's eyes, chopped off a finger, removed part of his ribs, sliced out his lung, cut off his head, and used a razor blade to grate a gash resembling a smile, according to an autopsy. Osuna, who had only become Romero's cellmate shortly before the killing, was serving a life sentence for murdering and torturing a 37-year-old woman in Bakersfield, California in 2011, the Times said. In a 2017 trial for his crime, he bragged to a news reporter about his love of torturing people. Osuna has been diagnosed with unspecified schizophrenia spectrum, antisocial personality disorder, borderline personality disorder, and post-traumatic stress disorder, according to KGET News. Criminal proceedings are suspended until Osuna is ruled to be competent to stand trial. Yo, that is some truly wicked, truly dark, really disturbing material. This a family show. What are we doing? We into paranormal. I saw a Satanist, did this and that, and I thought, oh, there's a paranormal story for this week's show. I ain't know it was going to be like that. Hide your kids. Hide your wife. I'm sorry you had to hear that, America, India, Australia, France. Those are my top countries. Big support to you. I'm sorry you had to hear about that. He wore that man's body parts like a necklace. That's disturbing. The trial's not going to happen till he's fit to stand trial. My gosh. I need communion. I need prayer. I'm a little afraid to walk out this shed and go back into my house. It's about 50 yards, and it's dark. My goodness, that story. I don't know where you stand on believing in demons, but that's some truly demonic stuff right there. For someone to be able to do that to another person that got so much darkness inside of them. Whew. Man, it's been a heavy show, ain't it? Systemic racism, QAnon, and Satanists. Where else do you find news like this, man? They don't cover this stuff on CNN, on Fox News, in the newspaper. Anybody still read newspapers? They don't cover this stuff, man. You got to come to In the Shed for the real. Whew. Lord, keep us and protect us. My goodness. For our last story this week, we go to Abilene, Texas. The haunting legend behind the black-eyed kids. The black-eyed children, also called black-eyed kids, are mysterious beings that look to be of kids between the ages of 6 and 16 years old. They only appear at night and to unsuspecting adults alone in parking lots or in their homes. Yo, I'm alone in my home. Well, technically I'm in a shed, but I am alone in my home because my wife and my daughter is out of town, so it's just me, a little man, kicking it. I actually got the baby monitor out in the shed right now. I'm about to tap it real quick, make sure my child ain't got no black eyes. Nah, he good. He's sleeping. I'm alone in my home tonight. They only target adults alone in parking lots and in their homes. The kids come in groups of 2 or more and often ask for favors. The favor could be to make a phone call, to get a ride home, to come in and get something to eat, or to use the bathroom. The answer is no, shouty. Can I use your phone? No. Can you come inside? No. Can you have a glass of water? Only if it's holy water, and I'm dumping it on your head. I'm dumping it on your head, baby. I ain't playing with you black-eyed children. The few people who have had interactions with the black-eyed kids express feeling unexplainable fear when the children are near. It's pretty explainable. They got black eyes. That's terrifying. No one really knows where they come from. Extraterrestrial, UFOs, vampires, and of course demons are a number of the assumptions around the kids. Brian Bethel was one of the first people to document having met black-eyed children in real life. He published a transcription of the event on his blog back in 1998. The following is part of his story. It was around 9:30 p.m. on January 16, 1998. Your boy was 9 years old back then, but my eyes were not black. I was not one of them children Brian saw. And Brian left his apartment in Abilene, Texas for the drop box to pay his internet bill. On the way, he stopped at the Dollar movie theater next to his service provider's building to use the glow of the marquee as light to make out his check. As he did this, there was a knock on the window, and he saw 2 young boys. He placed them between 10 and 14 years old. He described the boys like this. Boy number 1 was slightly taller than his companion, wearing a pullover hooded shirt with a sort of gray checked pattern and jeans. I couldn't see his shoes. His skin was olive-colored, and he had curly, medium-length brown hair. He exuded an air of quiet confidence. That sounds like me when I was 9 years old, to be honest with you. That's kind of how I dressed, and I got that brown hair, and I had that quiet confidence. But I wasn't in Texas, though. Boy number 2 had pale skin. No, that's more like me, pale skin. Boy number 2 had pale skin with a trace of freckles. His primary characteristic seemed to be looking around nervously. He was dressed in a similar manner to his companion, but his pullover was a light green color. His hair was a sort of pale orange. They didn't appear to be related, at least directly. Almost immediately, he knew something was up and felt a sense of fear. The first boy began to tell Bethel that they needed his help. They wanted to see the new Mortal Kombat movie, but forgot their money. Instead of asking for the money itself, the boy asked for a lift to their house to retrieve it. Our narrator is nervous and hesitant as the first boy continued to try to coax him, saying things like, "Come on, mister. We just want to go to our house. And we're just 2 little boys. Come on, mister, let us in. We can't get in your car until you do, you know? Just let us in, and we'll be gone before you know it. We'll go to our mother's house." You better not let them in, Brian Bethel. Brian Bethel found himself unlocking the door, oh my lord, without realizing, and is instructed by the child to do so. After catching his hands, he looks back at the kids with a fresh perspective. That's when he realized that the kids' eyes were solid black. No iris, no pupil. All the stories of people meeting black-eyed kids claim that once you realize their eyes are all black, things get dangerous. The second boy continued to stand there completely silent while the first boy threatens him, saying, "We won't hurt you. You have to let us in. We don't have a gun." According to Bethel, the boy was implying that they didn't need guns. He started pulling at the door and demanding to be let in. With the courage he managed to find, Bethel pushed his car into reverse and sped home, leaving the boys where he found them. Fast forward to November 14th, 1998, and Brian has an update for his ghost hunting blog and email list. He apparently didn't talk too much else about the black-eyed kids after the first post, even though his audience was hounding him with questions. The next one to encounter the kids is his friend, John. John Northwood was one of Brian's online friends who was a pagan rights coordinator for an Oregon organization called Spirit. Brian Bethel claims that he never told his friend about the encounter, yet this is an interaction they had towards the end of the same year. It takes place over chat. It starts with John asking the chat if they really believe in ghosts or kids with funny eyes, and then launches into his own anecdote with a group of black-eyed kids. Since then, the accounts have slowly grown. They reached an all-time high in 2013 when they made the news thanks to a weekly strange video submitted to MSN. A video was uploaded giving an alleged look at them. It was, however, quickly discredited, which only increased the mystery and curiosity surrounding the mysterious children. To date, there have been many claims, conversation threads, countless videos, and even a book by author David Weatherly. An indie director, Nick Hagen, directed a horror film incorporating the eerie characters into the plotline. It's called Black-Eyed Kids and incorporates a YouTube series he was working on called Sunshine. The movie was released on 12/21/12 right before the world was slated to end according to the Mayan calendar. So what are they? No one really knows what these kids are. The people who claim to see them and spend their free time hunting ghosts swear they're legit. Others aren't so convinced. The most interesting theory concerning the children's origins I've come across was this one. It comes from a book, Your Haunted Lives, The Black-Eyed Kids. According to this legend, the kids may be something called Atkan, spoken of in an ancient Iroquois Indian legend. The Iroquois Indians believed in a dark power called the Atkan that could take over children, and an evil one who would mate with human females to produce black-eyed, chalky-skinned children. These children were killed by the tribe soon after birth and burned to stop them from resurrecting. Children wandering alone in the woods could also be taken over by Atkan and would reemerge with black eyes and pale skin, acting nervously while repeating themselves over and over. Their goal was to destroy the tribe and infect all of the people with Atkan. So are you a believer? That's the legend of the Black-Eyed Kids, and it is a truly spooky one. I don't know what it is about those stories or those encounters, but they are terrifying. For some reason, in scary movies, in horror films, in spooky stories, old people and children always seem to be the most terrifying, don't they? And the story of Black-Eyed Kids is no different. The fact that they could be something presenting as innocent children but be filled with darkness is a scary thing. So what do you think? Is this just some horror blog that this guy wrote in order to gain some street cred? Is it a real thing? Do you have any experiences with black-eyed children? Have you heard any stories or legends about them in your time? Let us know. Email the show at intheshedwithwes@gmail.com. We would love to hear from you. That's all for this week. You don't have to go home, but you can't stay here. I can't either. It's back in the house and out of the shed for me. Thanks again for listening to episode 16. Make sure to subscribe, like, share, and review. It really does help. If you have any paranormal experiences, opinions about sports, or politics that you'd like to share, you can email the show at intheshedwithwes@gmail.com. Again, that's intheshedwithwes@gmail.com. I might even read it on air. Look for us on Spotify, Stitcher, Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And make sure to follow us on Twitter at InTheShed4. Tune in again next week when we'll hit the headlines, talk NBA playoffs, and I'll share about the time a pastor knew my very thoughts. This has been In the Shed with Wes Anderson, the best news show in the land covering politics, sports, and the paranormal. Have an adventurous and fulfilling weekend. I'll catch you tools later. Peace out, Boy Scouts. Meemaw, we made it!